for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General, thank you again for your patience. I just want to revisit the first discussion that we had about illegal marijuana operations, particularly in Southern California, just to close that out. I do want to clarify in alignment with your statements that these are definitely not legal operations. These aren't businesses that are being sanctioned underneath California's cannabis industry regulations, nor are they taxed. There's no oversight. There's no regulatory body touching them. And these are also not, I would say, mom and pop operations or single families with small illegal grows in their backyards. These are in Southern California, very large scale nurseries being put up in the middle of our desert. They are literally stealing water out of fire hydrants and out of California's aqueduct system. They are in some cases stealing land and squatting on these desert properties, and in many cases, over 90% of them using free labor in the form of indentured servants from people who are here illegally and don't have an ability to go to police like most employees would have. So this is truly a threat. It's a national security threat. It's an international threat. It's a domestic threat. And I would really welcome you to send a delegation out here to see it firsthand. This isn't a political thing by any stretch of the imagination, but I would love to have your commitment to have a small delegation from DEA, ATF, and if appropriate, FBI to come see it firsthand. We're starting to get traction with local law enforcement, but they desperately need the funding and support from the federal level. Would you be able to make a commitment to support at least a visit here to Southern California on this?
Well, let me have a chance to speak to the DEA about this, or to have one of my staff speak to the DEA and see what they know about the circumstances that you're describing. They certainly, the way you're describing them, of course, plus you mentioned, I think, 7 dead bodies being found, a combination of large-scale illegal activity, violence, indentured servitude. None of those are things that we should be ignoring. So I will be sure that the DEA looks into this.
Thank you, Attorney General. I truly do appreciate that. This is something I think all hands on deck, all levels of government is necessary to actually eradicate this. And like I said, it's actually bad for the legal cannabis industry as well. That's a sort of collateral negative effect. I do want to also go back to the conversation that we had around voter ID. I want to just tag up on my friend Representative Klein's comments and your response real quick to that. You mentioned that voter ID, the question with voter ID comes down to, does voter ID cause a disparate effect on certain demographics? I'd like to just get your sense of the answer to that, in your opinion. And I know you're not an election expert. I know you're not necessarily a social justice expert as well. But in your opinion, do you think requiring identification for the purposes of participating in an election does cause disparate effects on certain demographics? And if so, which demographics are those? Why does it cause a disparate effect, and what can we do to help that?
Yeah, so I should have added intentional or disparate impact, obviously. And the answer to that is in general is it depends on the particular jurisdiction and circumstances. It's not, Supreme Court's made clear, and as I pointed out, the mere fact of requiring voter ID alone is not the issue. The question is whether it deprives individuals of the right to vote, and sort of what the risk on the other side, what the evidentiary risk on the other side of fraud is. So you can certainly imagine. You don't need to imagine. I think as a general at a sort of a high level, the question is: are there people in demographic groups, for example, African Americans, who do not have voter ID? For any number of reasons. They may not have, there may be people in poor and disadvantaged neighborhoods who don't have automobiles and therefore don't have a driver's license, who are unemployed and therefore don't have those kind of identifications. So the question of having a photo ID is, and to many of us is, not a problem. Everybody we know has a voter ID, but that is not the case for many people all across America. And when it comes out that deprives people of their right to vote, we have a serious problem. And that is something that's determined on a case-by-case basis. And it is, as the chairman mentioned, it is a resource-intensive investigation to make a determination of whether in a particular circumstances voter ID has that consequence.
Thank you, Attorney General. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I do know a lot of Black people, Hispanics, poors of all demographic, and they certainly haven't had a challenge getting identifications. I think it's offensive to those demographics to imply that. But I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia.